Since we are our Westminster community, Mickey's big hand is on the 12, so it's time to begin, and we'll start with our patriotic song. Please stand. Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous night o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red flare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Miss Betty Lou.
Our presenter today is a 16-year-old resident of Westminster Oaks, a Miami native where she met and fell in love with her husband in junior high school. After high school, she headed north up here to Tallahassee and earned a nursing degree from Florida State University, followed by her MRS degree, which led her to a busy life as the wife of a Methodist minister in the Florida Methodist Conference. 2 daughters followed, and now 5 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. Jean and David lived in various Florida towns, which is standard for Methodist ministers, but somehow she managed an amazing medical career, and she has lots of stories to share on that. In retirement, they built a North Carolina retreat and lived there until her husband's health brought him back to Florida and to Westminster Oaks, where she has been a driving force of volunteering. She, as one person, brought our wonderful boutique from one table in the hall to what it is now. Jean Day, we appreciate you.
My moments for reflection are going to be a mini history lesson. Long before any of us were old enough to move here, some enterprising ladies had set up what now is the Acorn Boutique by putting a table in the hallway. They put donated items on it and sold them to residents and staff. When I moved here in 2007, Burke Jolly was president of the Residents Council. He came to see me, and he said, Diane Toole says she will co-manage the thrift shop with you if you'll agree. And I said, Burke, I have no idea. I said, I'm a nurse. I don't know how to do that. He says, oh, I'll help you. He was a lot of help. He never darkened the doors of the boutique. We never saw him there. Diana was only able to work with me for a short period of time before she developed some major health problems and had to deal with them. My meager staff consisted of a resident from the health center who was in a wheelchair and who bagged the purchases of customers, and a resident from assisted living who couldn't make change. And she insisted on keeping the cash box on top of the counter, and I kept saying, put it under the counter because people can reach in there and take money out. Well, I had to do everything. I had to price, I had to put stuff out. We had 2 racks, rather flimsy racks, that had dollar items on them that I had to move out into the hall. They were very flimsy, and one time one of them collapsed, and I had clothes all over the hall that I had to pick up and try to put the rack back together. I had to let my staff of 2 ladies go. The lady who couldn't make change got very angry with me, and I think she was in early stages of dementia. And one day she came into the boutique and she says, "Kiss my foot, I hate you," and turned around and walked out. Well, I was in a state of shock, and the residents who were in the boutique said, "Oh, don't worry about her, just consider the source." We really needed more space. At that time, there were 2 craft rooms rather than the one that's there now. And I tried to get Don Wilson to let us move in to the first craft room that was right adjacent to the thrift shop. And some of the men on the residence council even drew up floor plans to show him how we could do it. He wouldn't agree to it. At one point, I reached a point where I wanted out. I was getting tired. And I resigned as a manager. And that's when Mimi Stengel stepped into the picture. Mimi knew how to work Don. When he complained about the dollar racks in the hall, Mimi said, "Oh yes, they would be a fire hazard, especially if people on walkers had to evacuate from down here. There might even be a lawsuit." That's all Don needed to hear was a lawsuit. He immediately said we could have that room adjacent to the thrift shop. And that's where our current checkout counter is, where the purses and the handbags are. And back behind that area is where we do the pricing. At that time, there was an enclosed counter that must have been this high and about this deep that ran the whole wall of the area that we now have as our kitchen area. Mimi and I kind of called it a one-butt kitchen because only one person at a time could get in there. Well, Mimi decided we needed to remodel and make more efficient use of our space. We drew a plan to scale, closed the shop for 2 weeks while the maintenance department remodeled for us. We had that huge counter taken out of the kitchen and shelves put on the wall. We had shelves, they were 12 inches deep. We had them make 14-inch deep shelves, so we had more space to display stuff. And then we had them paint all of the rooms one color, because we had kind of 4 different areas, and every area was painted a different color. And so we had them painted all one color, so we looked a little more uniform. Then Mimi started what she called picking. And she'd take me with her. We went to apartments and houses where people moved out and they left furniture. And we would go and pick the furniture that we thought we could sell in the boutique. Furniture has been a good source of income for us. We would have to sell a lot of $3 blouses to make as much money as we can make on one $50 piece of furniture. We have sterling silver and gold jewelry that's donated that we can't sell for what it's worth. We collect this, and when we get a sizable amount of it, we go to a place called Affiliated Auction. They buy it from us by weight. And we can come back to the boutique with anywhere from $800 to $1,000 that we've made selling to them. And I have learned that if I have them make the paperwork out, dealer to dealer, we don't have to pay sales tax on what they pay us. It's clear profit. And we're ready to go this next Thursday with the stuff that we have collected over the last couple of months. No telling how much money we'll come home with. When the thrift shop was first started, it was not made a nonprofit enterprise. I contacted the state of Florida when I became manager to try to make it a nonprofit so we wouldn't have to pay sales tax. I was informed that the paperwork would have had to have been submitted to the state prior to we ever earning any money. So we have to pay sales tax. We don't charge our customers sales tax. That would get real complicated for our cashiers. And Marvin Rubenstein just takes the money out of what we make and sends it to the state for our sales tax. And I wish Mimi could be here today to share in this history lesson, but she's vacationing in Alligator Point this week. Mimi is retiring as manager at the end of this month, and the boutique is searching for someone to take her place. Could that be you, or you, or you? Think about it.
And Miss Jean is serious. We are looking for a manager, somebody whose our heart is really into it, because that is our sole, almost our sole source of revenue, 99.9. And so all those committees out there that come to the Residence Council for funding for their activities, keep that in mind, because were it not for the boutique, we wouldn't have any. So, Miss Darlene? Okay, a second? All in discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Marvin?
Hello. We've completed 21% of our fiscal year, and we had budgeted for income of $38,235, and we've taken in so far $7,225. So we've achieved 19% of what we projected to. Expenses, we budgeted $49,492, and our total expenses so far are $2,038, which means we've expended 4.1% of our budgeted expenses. Our general fund account balance is $69,999. Employee gift fund is $36,033. Savings account, $33,208, which means a total of $139,240. The July end of month report will be posted on my WLife the first week in August. Any questions? Thank you.
Oh, Miss Sandy.
Okay, I get the fun part of the whole meeting. You know that, don't you? Because I get to introduce the new residents that we affectionately call through Lynn Kimmel. What our favorite people. She calls us all that. You'll learn that when you get her emails. And we have 4 more favorite people. We have 2 couples. And the first couple, Frank and Frances Fincham, and they have come to Diplomacy Circle. And they've come to us as longtime residents of Tallahassee. And they say I can call them newlyweds because they were married in 2019. And now have the same first name. Frank is really Francis with an I, and Francis is with an E. So sometimes that can be confusing, right? So anyway, now it's going to be Frank. We'll call him Frank for short, and Francis. Now, Frank grew up in Durban, South Africa. Anybody else here from South Africa? All right. He attended university in England and has lived in the United States since 1980. He's been a professor in the Department of Child and Family Science at FSU for the past 15 years. That makes him an old. Frank has 2 daughters, a son, and a grandson. Now, although an avid reader, an occasional zing author, my husband loves reading those zings in the Democrat. This is one of those guys that entertains him. Frank's passion is really chess. So any of you out there that play chess, we want you to get in touch with Frank because he would love to meet you. Francis grew up in North Carolina and attended Wake Forest University and taught a variety of subjects and grades for 41 years. She is endorsed in reading and gifted education and earned her national board certification. She has a son and a daughter who live out of town, and Frances loves to read, bake, attend exercise classes, which are necessary after all the baking she does, she says, and cultivate herbs. She has lived in Tallahassee since 1993. Together, Frank and Frances love to travel and spend time at the beach. We have a lot of beaches. And get this, all you dog lovers, which I am one, they hope to adopt a puppy in the near future. So if you know some wonderful puppies, you might want to talk to them. So stand up for us, please. Frank and Frances, we welcome you. Thank you. Okay. Another wonderful couple here, Barbara and Mark Light. Now this is destiny, folks. You got to listen to this. Both Mark and Barb were born in Cleveland, Ohio, although they didn't know each other then. Mark's family moved to California when he was 3, and he was raised in Los Angeles. Barb's family moved to Los Angeles when she was 15, and although they met each other in high school, they didn't date until college. And shortly after that, they married. That's destiny, I think. Now, here's more. Get this. Mark and Barb both received BAs from UCLA, Masters in Psychology from San Diego State University, and PhDs in Psychology from the University of Illinois. Are they not well matched? Both were on the faculty of the Department of Psychology at FSU for 35 years prior to retiring in 2015. Now, Barbara enjoys walking, exercise, science, keeping up with current events. She likes to know what's going on, dogs, another dog lover, and mystery shows or movies, etc. Okay, now, here we go with Mark. There's a lot of things in common here. Mark enjoys music, reading, science, exercise, mystery books and shows, and sports. Both volunteer with the League of Women Voters, ladies. So we're very proud to welcome them also. Would you stand up, Barbara and Mark Light? They've moved on to Carefree Cove, folks, if you look for them. So thank you very much. We're so happy to have you. Always happy to have new ones, favorite people.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra. The quarterly report, you were here last for the town hall, no, correction, myself, the quarterly meeting that we had earlier this month. And I want to give you a couple of brief remarks about it. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but I'm initially start with Richard's impressions.
Are we on? Okay, thank you. Lanny asked me to comment about the financial aspects of Shannon's report. I'm chairing the Budget and Finance Committee. We will soon see what's called the annual report, which will be dated March 31st of this year, and which includes the financials for not only Westminster Oaks, but all of the Westminster communities, as well as the obligated group, which is the group that provides the substantial amount of borrowed money to finance operations, not to finance operations, to build facilities. The one takeaway that I got from the report that Shannon made was that we still have a very close operating margin. In other words, revenues and expenses are within about 1% plus or minus of each other. Westminster communities would prefer an operating margin of about 3 to 5%, but the dilemma they have, again, as Shannon pointed out in her slides, is expense control. There are some things that are continuing to be a problem, as you're well aware.
Thank you, Richard. The difference between what Richard does and what Marvin does is Marvin manages the funds of the resident council, and Richard looks at the universe that involves all of Westminster communities and what goes on in that realm. And it's interesting that you should keep up with what's going on. Inflation has abated a bit, but it's still out there, and that's something that Westminster Communities is having to deal with. Also at that meeting, they talked about hurricane preparedness, and I'd like Ms. Beverly to make a couple of remarks.
Yeah, at the town hall, Shannon talked about what administration does in preparation and during a hurricane, and then I followed that by discussing what Westminster provides to independent residents during a hurricane and how we might access this, and that was about it. But I'll put in a plug on My W Life emergency preparedness section is a 2-page document that sort of summarizes what and how residents can access Westminster services during a hurricane.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Beverly. Remember that we are independent living. A lot of preparation, and that is incumbent upon us, not necessarily Westminster Oaks. So you need to take that, your personal preparedness seriously. Moving on, because I've had some questions about the management audit. The original intent, back in April, when Ms. Marjorie and the previous resident council looked into this, was there would be a audit of the full management spread of Westminster Oaks and how they operated under the guidance of Westminster Communities. Westminster Communities decided rather that they would focus that on Ms. Shannon. That was not our intent in the beginning, but we didn't have much to say about it when it started. The committee was made up of 3 people, 2 of which were former executive directors, one with a property in Westminster Communities, the other one property outside. So these were people that understood what it takes to be an executive director. The audit found 4 areas in which Ms. Shannon needed improvement. This was openly discussed with myself and later with Jane Hudson, our vice president, with Ms. Shannon, so I'm not saying anything out of school here. The first area was delegation. A number of departments and individuals report to Ms. Shannon. And early on, after the audit, but before the results came in, there were moves afoot to change that. A number of those departments now report to Ms. Vicky, the Deputy Executive Director, and that's taken some of the pressure off of Ms. Shannon, which was the initial step to do that. Along with that was to let others carry out the duties that they're given them to do and not to micromanage. During the audit, the team visited with each one of the members of the resident council individually for about a half an hour. And they also visited with her Ms. Shannon's direct reports and some other people of which we are not privy to know who they were. But the debriefing team told me that the comments from the two groups were very similar. And micromanagement was one of them that came up from both groups. That is a challenge in the area of leadership, and I'll touch on that in a second. Communications was another area that there needed to be clear, concise guidance to her team members of what is expected of them, when, and so on and so forth. From my prior time, I'm a career service person. You tell people what you want them to do, when and where, but you don't tell them how. That's their job. Your job is to supervise them and provide them with the assistance they need, and for them to come to you when they need help. That's an area where there was some weakness in terms of communicating that clearly to her subordinates. Timeliness and accuracy of the content of her guidance to those people. It can't be confusing. They need to understand what it is she wants them to do and when she wants them to do it. Accountability. She must accept responsibility for her decisions and hold her subordinates responsible for theirs, the performance of them, and to take credit where it's due and work with them. Leadership is probably the most challenging of these because this is something that's not innate to most people. It's a learned skill that can be learned, but it takes time and effort, and it also takes stepping back from it. When you become a leader, you don't do everybody else's job. It's their responsibility to do it. Your responsibility, and we've seen some of this of late with her, is to surround yourself with people who know what they're doing. They're the technical experts. You're a generalist. That's why in the service we have general officers, as in university settings and other things. You have people that are generalists. They have a number of technical people under them whose responsibility is to make the wheels turn and to bring problems to you, but also bring solutions. And that's part of the leadership. So Ms. Shannon is working on these areas and is dealing with them. That's the essence of the report. Any questions from the council?
Are we going to see anything in writing, or is this all verbal?
This is all verbal, and I think there's probably the reason that they made it focused on her rather than a management report, because that probably makes it a personnel issue that cannot be addressed in that.
So essentially, we did not get a management audit. My thinking is you've made a very clear presentation here. I'm wondering if we could put that in writing, send it to Orlando, ask them to respond if in fact we heard clearly from them what we can expect in the future.
Okay, I'll think about that. Anybody else on the council? Any residents have questions about this? We've got a mic. Hold on a minute, Manny.
Lani, following up with what Marjorie said, are we going to receive follow-up on the progress of these findings?
Yes, we are. The team.
It's one thing to contemplate the findings, is another thing to, for instance, in 6 months, have a report on how progress has been made on these findings.
The debriefing team told me that there would be follow-up in they didn't do a particular time frame, but I'm guessing about 6 months to see where it is, and it is a continuing action. Does anybody else have questions?
It's a request, really, Lonnie, that we ask them for a time frame.
Okay, I'll do that. Ms. Beverly?
Good afternoon. As many of you know, we have something called the block captain system. This is a system in which there is a volunteer, a resident volunteer in each neighborhood or on each floor of an apartment building who is volunteered to be a block captain. This system was established at least prior to 2016. That's the last real evidence we have of it, in what's called the Emergency Preparedness Plan, which was written by administration with no apparent resident input, which has extensive responsibilities for block captains. Over the past few years, we've been in the process of evolving, for several reasons, the block captain system, and now it's come to a resolution. The initial responsibilities of block captains were basically three. One was to be a data gathering service in which contact data for each resident, and I call it vulnerability traits. In other words, characteristics of us as an aging population which make us more at risk during a hurricane. Things like, are we dependent on an electricity for some medical device like CPAP? Or do we use a walker? This sort of things that make us at greater risk during a hurricane. So that's one thing, and you may, especially those of us who have been here a longer time, may remember that every year you would be filling out a form that would ultimately come to the coordinator, which I am and Pat Johnson was, and then that would end up in the executive director's office in a big binder on the floor. So it's not apparent how useful that was to administration. But at any rate, what's happened over the intervening years is we've created an electronic database, and this has been far more useful, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The second big responsibility is for education. According to the plan, the block captains are responsible for educating residents on hurricane, especially hurricane preparedness, through block parties or flyers or this sort of thing. Over the years, it's been harder and harder, I think, for block captains to do this. It's a responsibility that requires different characteristics. First of all, in the data gathering, they have to be somewhat computer literate. In this education giving, they have to have skills as a public speaker, perhaps, or getting flyers ready and that sort of stuff. So basically, I've taken on the task of this mostly and done it through the block captains, but I've helped them create the materials and that sort of thing. The third thing is, and perhaps the most important, is to be a liaison between administration and the residents during an emergency when other forms of communication are not available. So during a hurricane, for example, if there's a power outage, maybe the phones are down. And so there's no way, if a tree falls on your roof, for you to let administration know that that's happened. And so the block captain system can do this. Administration cannot do this. They cannot have a staff member in every location waiting for a tree to fall. So that's an important function that block captains serve. And we can do this even in the absence of any other communication, since we have access to radio. And so we can activate the radio system and get a message to me, and I can get a message to Shannon. So those are the three major functions. Times have changed, though. Whoops, I went backwards. I guess the one with no sign is forwards, yes, logically. Okay, but times have changed. Number one is, a good thing that's happened is, we've worked in the last year with administration, and now the Health Resource Clinic has taken over the collection and management of the data. And this is good because actually they were collecting the information anyway. On the initial assessment, when you come in, you visit the Peggy in the clinic, and she takes an assessment, and then we have the wellness checks, and then we have case management checks, et cetera. So there's no need for us to do the same thing. And so they have taken over this job, which is wonderful. You notice you're not having to fill out the forms unless there are changes. New residents fill out the forms once. And so this has become much more efficient and labor-saving for us. And it's very important for us because the other big thing that's happening is and this is countrywide, the nature of residents in CCRC is changing. We come later when we are a little more advanced in age and also in problems. And therefore, we're basically aging in place. And so it's harder and harder to get volunteers who have the mental and the physical capability to do this, as well as they look at their population and they go, oh my word, because so many of them have significant problems. So it's harder and harder to get volunteers. So we've made, again, working with administration, a significant change in the role of block captains, basically limiting the function of block captains to an essential role that administration cannot do, and leaving the other functions that we were supposed to be doing to administration. And so the function is that during an emergency, block captains will act to be a source, a liaison of communication between administration and residents in both directions. So the following resolution says this. It's very long. Sorry about that. But I wanted to make sure it was very specific and would cover all bases. So I'll try to, I'm sorry I have to read it to you, I guess. Do I have to read it? Yeah, I do. Okay. That administration incorporate the following block captain system into its emergency planning, and that the independent living emergency preparedness plan be updated to reflect that the block captain system be limited to critical communication liaison between independent living residents and administration during community-wide emergencies, particularly hurricanes, when power, internet, cell phones may be disrupted. Even if such systems are functional, security, maintenance, and the administration phone lines may be overwhelmed, and the block captain system should be activated and supported by administration to pass critical information to and from IL residents and the administration. During a community-wide emergency, block captains can phone or text the emergency communication coordinator, that's me, who can get a message to the executive director and very quickly. And should these systems fail, each neighborhood has a battery-operated radio that the block captain has been trained to use. So that's the resolution. Oh, questions?
Well, I accept a motion to approve this resolution. Second? Discussion by the council? Any? Hearing none, discussion by the residents?
So what exactly emergencies are we responsible for as independently? If we have a medical emergency, we don't call administration, right?
That's true.
Not
This
their
is
problem.
during,
So can we be very specific about what that is we're
this
supposed
says
to tell
during
them?
a community-wide emergency. That's basically the buzzword for it. It's not for every time something happens to an individual.
I know, but even during a hurricane, if I'm having a heart attack, that's not Shannon's problem.
That's right. That's, in a sense, true. However, if everything's down, she may be your only resource. That's the point. Yes, you're always supposed to call 911 first, if the cell phone's working. And of course, in a hurricane, that's going to be great power-wise, but also how functional they are. But anyway, but yeah, 911 is always first.
Any other questions? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next one is a pretty quick and short one. The ad hoc committee for Dempsey Mayo, after their meeting with the county commission, in which the county commission approved the 3 raised crosswalks, the one at W.T. Moore, the one at entrance at Meandering Way, Meandering Lane, and the one at Emerald Chase. However, they did not approve funding for the widening of the sidewalk between Meandering Way and Emerald Chase to a 10 or 12 foot wide multi-use trail that would allow golf carts to traverse that area. Currently, all traffic off of this side of Westminster Oaks is illegal. It's illegal to travel on Dempsey Mayo. It's illegal to cross Dempsey Mayo. It's also a state law to drive on sidewalks with a golf cart. So this is area that's being sorted out by the Dempsey Mayo Committee. The county's also looking at an ordinance to be modified to pass something, and this trail would allow that. However, because of the lack of funding, they requested that I send a memo to Ms. Shannon requesting that $330,000 of capital spending be put into the 24-25 capital budget for Westminster Communities to do this. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll happen, but it is a request. I've given that to her verbally, but this is a memorandum, and rather than reading it to you, I think you can see what I've just said. The most important thing is that the safety of the residents and the team members is in jeopardy. There's no curb, and there's only about a 24-inch wide grassy area between the roadway and the current sidewalk. So it is dangerous. And the county recognized that. The county engineer consulting firm recognized that and recommended, and the county basically shook their head and said, yes, it's needed, but there are sidewalks needed all over Tallahassee, and some of them involve schools and other things, and so each commissioner in their area has their own priority. So there's a lot of competition for those few, I think it's about $20 million or something like that goes for sidewalks every year. So it's highly competitive, and we need to move this forward. So I'd ask for a motion to approve this memorandum. Beverly, second. Richard, discussion? Julian?
Came up with the 325.
The 330 came from the consulting engineer firm. Any other questions from the council? From the residents? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sunny Phillips. I was wondering if there was any discussion about the county paying for half and Westminster Oaks paying for half.
Ms. Marjorie, you want to address that?
Let me just say, this is still a negotiating item with the county. We just want to make a very clear point that this is we consider this an essential safety factor for our residents.
May I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
And I was just going to say, I mean, when Westminster Oaks bought land across a major street for two different neighborhoods, it should have occurred to them that it would be a safety issue as well. And I think they should be willing to do this.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe we could remind the county of commissioners that we vote.
Yes, ma'am. We're the highest voting precinct in the county, I believe.
Hey, that's great. Let's remind them of that.
Yeah. Well, our county commissioner,
Brian Welch.
Brian Wilson, Welch was here 2 Fridays ago, I guess, to speak to the men's group. And we asked him specifically about this, and he gave us the same answer. Even if he votes for it, he's only one vote on the county commission. So each of them in their districts have people competing. So that's where it is. It is that kind of issue. And that's the reason we want to bring it to the attention of Westminster communities and consider all options. So there are some right-of-way options. There's some other things that might be able to be thrown into the mix to see what we can do to move it forward. The county might be willing to throw in some engineering services and things like that that would help us move this forward. Any other questions from the residents? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The last thing I want to cover is, and quickly if we can, is the resident council's goals for the new year. I didn't write the whole goal up here because it would make these slides lengthy and unreadable. Can everybody read what is on the slide currently? Okay, well then, under the quarterly meeting, which several of us misspoke this morning, this afternoon, quarterly meeting is different from the town hall. It's required by statute, and we're trying to make sure that they follow those requirements in the statute quite clearly, and that is that there is proper notification of proposed changes in policies, programs, fees, and services. That is required. The January 24 quarterly meeting should be the one at which the proposed budget that Ms. Shannon is submitting for Westminster Oaks will be presented to us for our questions and concerns. And so that's, we have moved forward in that in the last year. A goal is supposed to be something that is accomplishable within a reasonable period of time. A couple of these are not going to meet that requirement, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for them. And with that one, the second one is the ad valorem taxes. We're still trying to get serious response out of Westminster communities about how the assessments are allocated across the various kinds of properties of Westminster Oaks to individuals, including common areas. We still haven't gotten a good answer from that. It may not happen during my tenure, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to work on it. It is complicated. The county tax assessor tells us that there are, I think, 69 different parcels on Westminster Oaks property in the 140 acres. So it is complicated, And it's more complicated than some of the other communities, which are all in one high-rise building. Capital budget, still trying to get in sync with the administration as to when they need our input from the residents through the resident council. This year we've come pretty close, but again, you see the memo that we just approved trying to add some things to that. So we are moving forward and trying to make sure that process also works correctly. Policy advisory committees. Because of the change in focus in some of these policy advisory committees, we want to give the chair broad latitude in how they organize their committee to tackle the problems. We range from a very large committee with over 20-something people that has an executive group in it to a smaller committee of half a dozen. So each of those there's 8 policy of those committees, policy advisory committees, and letting them organize to see how they think is best they can approach their particular issues. Communications, and that's one of them that scaled down because we decided to focus strictly on MyWLife this year. The Communications Committee back in 2018 did a study, and of about the 16 recommendations that they forwarded, 8 of them had to do with MyWLife. And so this year we said, okay, let's try to tackle this rascal. It's got a lot of moving parts, most of which involve the techie people at Westminster Community, Florida. So as hopeful as we are, we may not get it all fixed, but we are working on it to see if we can make it useful so that when you really want some information, that's where you can go to get it. That's our objective for this year in communication.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
I believe, am I correct that part of their looking at the MyWLife would also be giving attention to those people who don't use computers? Is that part of it? Yeah.
Also involved in that is our own Ms. Rochelle, for those that have hearing or sight impairments that make using the computer difficult. We're also looking at how that can be done. Grounds. We changed the focus of grounds late last year, and what we're doing is making it more like compatible with what the maintenance committee does. Your personal grounds for your resident, and this mostly involves people who live in the duplexes and freestanding homes, that's your responsibility to submit work orders if there's something that needs to be done within your property. The current grounds people under contract mow and trim and edge. Those are the things they're supposed to do. And then they annually weed and feed and that sort of thing. But additional things need to be done through the work order system. And the grounds committee is trying to get that under control so that they can be more responsive. James Kiesler, our contractor, is doing a very good job. He is being responsive, but he needs to be able to prioritize his work. Some of that work can, in fact, be done by some of the maintenance people, which cuts down on the contract costs. But that can only be managed if we use the work order system, and that's what we're trying to do. Maintenance. The new micromain system is actually on campus. They've started training down in the maintenance department. This is an upgrade to the current system that they use down there to manage their workload. It's supposed to make it more efficient, cut down on the number of pieces of paper that are circulating around, to make it more transparent. Hopefully it'll be that the actual person that's doing the work order will show up on their company phone as to where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to do. And at the end of the day, there would be an exception report for the things that they were supposed to do that didn't get done, so that management could then look at it and prioritize it for the next day. You know, if the parts aren't available, or the person that needs to do it's not available, or it needs to go to an outside contractor, that sort of thing can be managed through this system. We're hoping that they'll get all that put together here within the next month or so. Apartment buildings. This is on our wish list for the capital improvements. It's probably not going to happen this year, it may not happen next year, but it's a goal to have security mechanisms in the 2 garden apartments in Oak South. Currently, Oak South is done manually. I'm around at 5:30 in the morning to see them unlocking the doors, but that should be done automatically as it's done in Canopy. Now, the system in Canopy hasn't been perfect. There's some bugs to work out of it, and if Manny will raise your hand, he can tell you some of the problems that have existed with it. But it's better than what we have right now. So anyway, we're moving forward with that. And that was an initiative that came from you all. Aging in place. Ms. Beverly touched on this. This is in a transition. It's something that started, I guess, according to the folks around here, about 2008. And so you can see that it's not moving at the speed of light. It's got a lot of difficulties, and some of it is because we only recognize those difficulties when we actually try to deal with it, as we with in the emergency management thing. So as we age in place, we need more services. Some of those can be provided by Westminster Oaks through the assisted living, if somebody wants to move up there to do that, or through aides that can come to you, or outside aides if people wish to hire those kinds of people. There are other kinds of things, like a person who only can't remember to take their pills. There are automatic pill dispensers that can be tied to their cell phone, that if they don't open the little gizmo in time, the clinic gets a call, somebody to follow up as to why they're not taking the pills. But there are things that can be done to help with aging in place. But it's going to take time, and the administration needs more resources in the area of case management to try to help this come into full use. But it's not going to go away. It's only going to become more so as we all want to stay where we are. Although Pat Hogan, who's here right now, would be glad to tell you that the living in assisted living, where you get a cot and 3 hots, isn't too bad. So it's a good thing for some of you. I'm going to keep my day job. I'm not a comedian. Dining, we know that that's a continuing issue coming out of COVID when we had high personnel turnover. That's going to continue because a lot of those jobs, especially in serving, are entry level. So there is going to be turnover. And so we're working with them and the dining committee. I cannot stress too much. Please, and I know Carolyn reminds you in the dining committee meetings and in the chats, fill out the cards and sign them. Let her be able to contact you and find out why 50% of you think the peas are too cold, the other 50% think they're too hot. The French onion soup has too much pepper, or it doesn't have enough. But those are the kinds of issues that they need to be aware of. If the food is not at the right temperatures when it's served, you know, it doesn't do her much good to hear that a month later in a chat. You know, she needs to know that day. So who's on the line? Who are the servers? Who is the cook that prepared it? That helps her to react to it. So our input is essential to making the dining committee and dining services work for us. We can't just say that I'm never going to eat there again because it's not good. That doesn't fix it. So please cooperate with the dining committee. The last one, which is truly Ms. Beverly's bailiwick, what we're dealing with at the council level is to work with the administration in emergency communications and to keep those lines of communications open, especially during severe weather. We did have a small test of this, I think it was back in June when we had that storm that knocked out a substation for 6 or 8 hours. The Call 'em All system was initiated for the first time since COVID started, and we found out there were some issues with it. Some of those lie with us as residents to ensure that Lynn and the business office have your correct phone numbers, if you have more than one, and your email addresses, especially if there's more than one, so that those are available. And then in an emergency, when all those systems are out, the block captain system comes into play. Under the correction or upgrading of MyWLife comes in here because currently we have somewhere under half a dozen directories. None of them talk to each other. None of them have the same information in them. And that's one of the tasks that the Communication Committee is trying to work with. Part of that starts in the business office with the PCC, the point-click care system that Westminster Communities has installed across all their properties to try to capture all that data. But it's incumbent upon us, again, to make sure that they have all your phone numbers and all your email addresses and any changes there too. So as we try to get a single database directory from which we can draw others, and then figure out which directories we really want, because some of them are going to be managed by us, not by the Westminster Communities, because we have requested them. If we have requested them, then we need volunteers to manage them. So anyway, it's got a lot of moving parts. These are all interrelated, as you see. So for the rest of the year, I would like a motion from the council to accept these goals. Richard, second. Sharon, discussion from the board. None. Discussion from the residents. Mr. Manning?
Lonnie, Lonnie, is just a comment on aging in place. I know that I hear repeatedly it's going to take time. Can we address some of those goals to make it happen in the next 12 months? See, the issue that bothers me the most is that we got an increase in our fee, in our monthly fee of 10%. It didn't take time for that at all, okay? So I confess, I am a problem solver. I always were in my professional life. So it is hard for me to understand why we cannot identify, because it is a major problem. Okay, aging in place is a major problem that touches a lot of areas. For instance, emergency. So can we identify at least a couple and with the administration address them?
Oh, yes, we'll work on that. Miss Jill Sandler, the chair of the Health Services Advisory Committee, is here and has heard you. I know they're working on it. Again, I can't give you a timeline. I know it's got a lot of moving parts, but it's something we're all aware of. And that's the key thing, is to keep the administration aware of our concerns about this and how we move forward with it. They did do the first of 2 presentations, I believe, on transitioning from independent living to either assisted living, the healthcare center, or memory care, as to how that happens, what are the requirements on us as residents to do that. So some of that is incumbent upon us to energize the system to make it work. Part of that is working with Ms. Pecky and the Health Resource Center. HIPAA has a part to do with this, but our part we can play as good neighbors is, if you see a neighbor who is struggling, just pass that on to Ms. Peggy. It's their job to track it. It's not our job to figure out that I think my neighbor needs to be in assisted living. That's not my job. But if I think somebody is struggling, then it should be incumbent upon me to make the clinic aware of that so they can check it out. Because I don't know what's going on in that person's life. There may or may not be a reason for it. But it's a good place to start, is for us to educate ourselves as to how we move from one level to another, if we want to do it, or if we want to stay in our house, what are the services that are available and how do we engage them? Part of that is our responsibility. Other questions? On the board, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Well, I haven't kept up with Miss Marjorie. I'm over about 8 minutes. I do have, on second thought, I'm not done, actually. But these weren't mine. They were brought to me later. The first one is, before we get to Miss Pam, announcement, I guess this one comes from Miss Carolyn initially, is the next dining chat is 3 August. I don't have my calendar in front of me as to what day of the week. I believe it's a Thursday. And going forward, dining chats will be on the first Thursday of the month. I do not have a time at this point. Okay, Ms. Pam?
Hello, everybody. We'd like to invite you to a birthday reception / open house next Saturday, the 22nd, in the pub, the Oak Room, the courtyard, whatever we need to do. But do stop by and get some birthday cake. My birthday. My family's coming. Sorry. They insisted we need to do something. I'm going, just another year.
Okay, Mickey's big hands on the 2, so we're 10 minutes over. We stand adjourned.